Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen, and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. 1963's The Terror, celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, is a legendary curiosity item from producer-director Roger Corman, more famous for its origins than the finished product. According to legend, when Corman wrapped shooting on The Raven ahead of schedule, he took advantage of Boris Karloff's 2 extra contracted days to slap together this tale of a reclusive baron with a dark secret. With the sets for the previous film being torn down around the actor's ears, Corman and others shot all of Karloff's scenes back to back and then composed the rest of the movie to fit. Relative novice and Raven co-star Jack Nicholson stars as a Napoleonic officer whose beachside encounter with a beautiful young woman leads him to Karloff's castle sanctuary and the ghostly haunts that lie within. 5 years later, those mysterious 2 extra days that Karloff supposedly owed Corman showed up again when the latter approached neophyte writer-director Peter Bogdanovich with a proposition of using 20 minutes of footage from The Terror, shooting 20 minutes of new footage with Karloff, and filling out the rest with whatever else Bogdanovich would come up with. Against all odds, the rookie auteur spins a fantastic yarn juxtaposing the real-life horror of a Charles Whitman-like assassin against Karloff's fading brand of gothic frights, with the 80-year-old veteran rendering one of his finest roles in his very long career. Tonight, we'll be celebrating these 2 examples of environmental filmmaking, i.e. reduce, reuse, recycle, with The Terror having recently been released in a newly restored Blu-ray via Film Masters. I'm very excited to talk about these 2 Karloff showcases with my awesome panel of guests. So let's bring everybody in. And let's say hello to John Kitley, Gavin Schmidt, and David Lee White ringing in from the East Coast. And we're here to talk about The Terror from 1963, celebrating its 60th anniversary, and Targets from 1968, celebrating its 55th anniversary. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome.
Glad to be here.
So let's talk Karloff. David, when you were on earlier this year, we were talking about Black Sabbath, and you were talking about how much you enjoyed old Karloff, like Karloff in his vintage years. And I feel like these 2 films kind of showcase what an amazing presence he is. But also he was having, like, especially in 1963, he was having a moment again. It was his first time back on the big screen since 1958 with The Raven. And then from The Raven led to Black Sabbath, led to The Terror. And, you know, he just kind of like sparked up his career again.
And weren't we getting a lot of like Boris Karloff on TV back then too?
Yeah, well, that was just it. From 58, from 58 to 63, he was pretty much like the guy on TV.
I saw The Terror for the first time. There was a UHF station in Missouri, Channel 24, and it was an all-religious station. But there wasn't, and it was horrible. I mean,
what religion is this? Yeah,
right. Missouri is its own religion. There wasn't enough religious programming to fill it up, so they showed public domain movies. And man, this movie was on all the time.
Oh wow!
And but I gotta say, I think I've never seen it chronologically from beginning to end until I watched it for this podcast. I think I've seen it because I was like, oh, that's the story, you know. But certainly I grew up seeing 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, you know.
John, I know you got the Film Masters Blu-ray. We've had that conversation already that like The Terror has never looked as good as it does in this newly restored version. It's kind of incredible, having only ever seen it on these public domain releases.
Kind of like David said, I mean, because this was in public, because this was in public domain, it was always available on video, and God knows how many versions in varying quality. One of the reasons for that is because some of the stuff was so fast-paced shot, setting up the lighting and taking the care that you normally would was thrown out the window because they had to get everything shot. So it wasn't lit like it should have been. But this was one that I watched early in my career of a horror fan because it had Karloff in it, and because again it was easily accessible. Seeing it with the new Film Masters version is night and day. You do get to see some of that glorious color, really vibrant, that you kind of lost out on all those shabby VHS tapes. But I think the most important, this is one of those films that the story behind it is actually more entertaining than the actual film. I still like the film. It is not one of Corman's best. When you know how it got made and all the ins and outs and who was involved, you just sit there and go, damn, that is impressive.
Yeah.
That is impressive.
We will get into all the ins and outs because there's a lot of people
Yes.
who are behind the camera on this one. Gavin, how about you? What was your introduction to the terror?
I definitely first saw it when it was probably in a box set with a dozen other movies. Going back to watch it now, my memory of having watched it before was just, this movie is terrible. It's not a good movie. I didn't really remember it very well, other than that I thought it was terrible. Now, having rewatched it, I actually kind of liked it. It's still not good. The plot doesn't make a lot of sense, in my opinion. It's kind of lacking, and especially when you know how it was made, it's really obvious that, Karloff basically is just in the movie to walk around, just constant scenes of him walking across the main room. But going into it now and actually really giving it my full attention, I don't think it's bad. And especially knowing what it is and how it had to be cobbled together, it's actually kind of remarkable that it turned out as well as it did.
It's so much better than it has any right to be.
Yep.
And the fact that they hadn't even written the script, they'd written enough of the script to get Karloff's stuff in the can in those 2 days. And then they went away and they shot and they shot and they shot and they shot with 5 different directors. The fact that they have a movie at all that makes any kind of sense is kind of remarkable.
First of all, you had Leo Gordon and Corman sitting down to get a brief plot that they could film the Karloff. And then every director almost between Coppola and Jack Hill that took it, or Monty Hellman, started rewriting the script as well.
Right.
And there's parts of the film where the dialogue is overdubbed. So whatever the actor was actually saying, they redubbed it because that didn't fit the new version of the script. And the fact that I think Corman said it took 9 months to finally finish it.
Together,
yeah, it is better than it ever has any right to be. It's actually pretty entertaining. Then when you hear all the stories, again, it gives you so much of an appreciation of what Corman and Hill and all of these guys that were trying to do it with no money, no time. And I love the fact that Coppola went over budget on 3 days shooting to get this glorious looking stuff, and came back and went, well, I spent too much money and I'm over budget. And
Corman just basically like, okay, you're done.
Yeah, you're done.
I thought the same thing, that it was much better than it had any right to be. But I must admit, I did sit there and go, wow, that's weak. Sometimes, there's a little, Jack Nicholson now is in a fist fight with a hawk. All right. Poor Jack Nicholson, who I'm a huge Jack Nicholson fan, and Dick Miller, right? He's in this too.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. And Jonathan Hayes.
And Jonathan Hayes, right, who unrecognizable. I didn't even realize that was him until. But yeah, I felt like watching Jack Nicholson was like watching a college student in his first movie go, I'm gonna play this part just like Jack Nicholson.
Well, and it's funny when you watch, having seen The Raven, he's actually quite good, and he holds his own against Laurie and Karloff and Price. And then, being given the lead role here, I think that maybe he was feeling a little bit of that pressure, was just kind of leaning into his persona.
Yeah, he feels a little hemmed in. He seems a little stuck by the Napoleonic character.
Yeah, for sure.
Plus, it probably didn't help that he had probably no script.
Right.
So
Right.
you just
Memorize the lines
stand
of-
there,
Yeah.
walk over there, say something to him, and then do this.
Well, and
Right.
our roster of directors, I mean, as you said, we got Corman, who's doing some of the stuff. We've got Francis Ford Coppola. We've got Monty Hellman. We've got Jack Hill. And we've gotten Jack Nicholson directing a couple of scenes as well. Again, the fact that this became a movie at all is pretty ridiculous. Now, that said, because I agree, I kind of had written it off as like, meh. I mean, it's certainly in that Gothic vein as the other AI pose that were coming out around that time. But if you watch the Film Masters, there's like a couple of like really great like visual essays where they talk about various themes that are coming up, and you go, I don't think for a minute that's what was going on for Corman. But like, it's just wonderful to see somebody, like apply a critical lens to it and be like, you see this theme coming up here and this theme coming up here, and you notice this, the way this is shot shows this. And I'm like, no, I don't buy that for a second, but oh my God, I love this movie now.
Yeah, I haven't got to see the Film Masters version. I do have it now. It was an immediate purchase based on John's blog post.
Yeah.
But I haven't actually watched the special features yet. But yeah,
The commentary is great,
Yeah. If anybody's arguing that there was any deep thought put into that movie, I think they're full of it.
Yeah.
Now, I had heard before that Corman used to throw some psychological Freud stuff in there, which again, I just can't see him doing that because he's trying to make a quick buck. I mean, he's making movies. I don't know. They say in this one with the waves coming in where the tunnel the girl comes out of, the witch.
Right.
And then in the pendulum, the when they're going down the stairs, the big towered along the staircase, all these phallic symbols and stuff. And I'm just sitting there going, get the hell out. Corman wasn't thinking, we need big dicks here. That's what we need. No. But it could be wrong. You never know.
Because I loved some of the dialogue so much, I made sure and there are snippets of dialogue on WikiQuote, and they had top of it is my favorite exchange. So I thought that I would read it. Helene says, "The crypt, it must be destroyed, and with it, the dead." Andre, Jack Nicholson, says, "Don't speak of the dead anymore. You're with me now." Helene says, "I am possessed of the dead." Andre says, "You're a warm, living woman. Who has told you these things?" And Helene says, "The dead." So that was my favorite exchange.
Again, written in just a couple days. You can totally see that.
Can anybody explain it? Because maybe I'm just thinking too hard or being too critical, but I don't understand the whole concept that Jack Nicholson runs across this mysterious woman, and then he has to go and tear the Baron's house apart and order the butler around. And does he even have the authority to do this? Like, what?
No,
What is the story here?
Well, and this is again where the commentary came in handy, because I just kind of written it off as a convoluted, but it does kind of track. So the idea is that Helene is the daughter of the Baron's wife, who he murdered, and she is being possessed by the witch so that she will go and pretend to be the ghost of his wife. And then it turns out that the son, who was the wife's lover,
Eric.
The Baron came home and found them together, Eric, turns out he is the son of the witch, but actually it was the Baron who was killed in the exchange. And so Eric took over. The witch sends Helene to haunt her own son. And then, it all plays out at the end. Now, it doesn't quite explain why Helene melts at the end. That's a bit beyond. I think that's them just going, hey, we've got some stuff left over from the case of M. Valdemar. Let's put some goop on Sandra Knight and make her melt.
The fact that Eric, the son, is about 20 to 30 years older than the mom.
Hey, that castle living ain't all it's cracked up to be.
You know, you say that's interesting. One track that I found myself going off on while I was watching this is here's a guy alone in a castle with one other guy, right? Stefan, is that the
Yeah,
name of
right.
the
Yeah.
character?
Dick Miller character.
Like, what's that life like? Like, where do they get their food? Who does someone deliver? Like, I was really, and I know you're not supposed to think about those things, and normally I wouldn't, but there were some walking scenes that I had
Yes, there were.
to do. What is their day to day when Jack Nicholson's not there? You know?
Right. Have breakfast,
Yeah.
walk around again, you know.
One of the stories that I liked that this the first time that I had heard this, and one of the commentaries or the behind the scenes on this Filmmaster's disc is that Corman started filming this on the set of The Raven without telling AIP.
Of course.
So it was a whatever his production company was filming it, and then Arkoff shows up. Hey, Roger, what are you doing? What are you doing on our sets?
Yeah.
So that had to have been kind of awkward for Corman to get caught. But again, he didn't want to waste those sets. I thought that was genius of him.
Well, and I think that because this is something that always had confused me is that, supposedly this whole genesis behind this film was the fact that Karloff owed Corman 2 more days. And then suddenly, flash forward to Targets and it's like, it's those same mysterious 2 more days. And I'm like, wait,
Yeah.
he already used those. But I think what you're saying there, John, is that when AIP came on board or discovered that these films, the film was being shot on their sets, that it became a different contract.
Yeah.
That Karloff actually, signed on for this film, and they still shot it in 2 days.
From what they said on there, Karloff was done with The Raven.
Right.
Corman wanted to hire him for a couple of days, but his agent was saying, no, it's X amount of dollars per picture. But Corman talked directly to Karloff and convinced him to work for 2 days.
Right.
On the same set. So it wasn't leftover days or a contract. It was a new contract. But when AIP found out,
Yep.
then it became an AIP production.
Right.
Instead of Corman doing it on his own, or I think it did both, but I think AIP released it.
And that's how those 2 days hung on
correct.
to Karloff, that, he still owed him, quote, 2 more days.
Yeah.
And that's how Targets came to be. But yeah, because that always has bothered me. I'm like going, wait, how many times do you get to play the "you owe me 2 more days" card?
And when you think about that, every time I've always heard about contracts and stuff, it's you're hired for a period of time at X amount per week. But does that mean if the production ended 3 days early, you're gonna get paid for those?
Well, I always
therefore he wouldn't have to pay Karloff because it would have already been in the contract.
Well, here's the other thing that has always kind of confused me, and it confused me about the last batch of Film Masters stuff we talked about, is that Corman's film group, like somehow all of these films, Corman being such a savvy businessman, all of these films somehow fell into public domain. Like, Little Shop and Bucket of Blood and The Terror, it's like we see all of these show up on those, 50 movies box sets. It's like, how did Corman let all of that go? I would love to know the story behind that. And that's something I haven't heard yet is what the answer is behind how all of those films slipped into public domain when that just doesn't seem like Corman's way.
It could be that maybe at that time, nobody was thinking that these are going to play in the theater and then that's it.
Right.
Maybe a second run, but they weren't, I don't think anybody had the idea of what was going to come down.
The fact that Karloff's film, he shot all of his stuff in 2 days. I mean, they worked that guy as well. Like, yes, there's some repeated shots of him walking across, but like he's ending this movie in like this tub of water, like just being like water and styrofoam rocks, like blowing all over the place. And him and, Nicholson struggling in the, I'm just like, dang, like this guy was like 75 at the time.
Well, isn't there like a story that some of that isn't even him? It's like
definitely there's some parts where it's not him. You can see.
Yeah, so I don't even know how much of that he was even involved with.
I have read that he was not happy about that because he either caught pneumonia or came out of that getting sick because of being waist deep in cold water. So I know that was him at some point in there.
Yeah.
I
Well, you
just
can
don't know
see
how
it's
long.
him like getting like, water just
Yeah.
coming down
Mhm.
on him.
Yeah.
And that's in a really impressive set piece. Like again, considering that like they were throwing this together in 2 days, I'm like, where do they get like the means to like have a tank with water like pouring in? Like it's kind of amazing.
Well, I thought in general, I had not seen the new Blu-ray, but I watched it. It's streaming on the MGM channel, and it's a pretty gorgeous print. Like,
Mhm.
but certainly better than anything I've seen before. And some of the photography is Baba-esque, like just shy
Yeah,
of
yeah.
that. It doesn't quite breathe the same way, but the colors are all there, and it really kind of sucks you in. So the film really does look good. They must have taken some time, to get stuff framed because it's nice.
Well, and Corman, certainly was of that same mind as Bava with a lot of like the colored filters and things like that when he was doing his Gothic films, which
Mhm.
were in turn inspired by the Hammer films.
What's really great about The Terror is how, in retrospect, we see this as a prime example of the talent that Corman cultivated. I don't think I'm going too far. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Corman may be one of the most important filmmakers of the 20th century, if for no other reason than all the talent that he introduced to the world, and The Terror being a prime example of some of those people. Nicholson, Coppola, Monty Hellman, yeah, I mean, even Jack Hill, who's not as well
Yeah.
known in mainstream circles. Just a fantastic list of people who made it. Uh, and then down the line, of course, Bogdanovich and Jonathan Demme and so on. Just
Ron
Ron
Howard.
Howard.
Ron Howard. Yeah, we wouldn't have the filming world we do today without him. So The Terror
And I
is kind of like a capsule of that.
and not to disagree with you, Gavin, but I don't know if I would use the word introduce them. I think he showed them how to make films the way the Corman way, doing it fast and cheap and but quickly. I think it's not like they just here's a guy in a street corner, we're going to give you a job. I think he cultivated their talent that they already had and
Mhm.
showed them how to make films creatively, quickly, and cheaply, and still produce a quality product.
I think what I think he did do though was give them opportunities
Yes,
that
yes,
nobody else was giving them, and like saying, like in the case of Targets, where he tells Bogdanovich, he's like, okay, I got 2 days to work with Karloff. I got 20 minutes from the Terror. You go off and write something else that'll fill up the extra 40 minutes, and you can make a movie. Do you want to do it? And like that's the kind of opportunity he would present. He'd be like, here's kind of an impossible thing. Do you want to do it? And they go, of course, because they're young and hungry. They say, yeah, I want to. And if they have the talent, they go on. I mean, we
right.
don't, I'm sure there were lots of other people that worked for Corman that we don't hear about, that aren't the Joe Dantes and aren't the Monty Hellmans.
Yes.
And I'm sure there's plenty of forgotten, people who had their shot and they didn't become Ron Howard. But let's talk about Targets because that premise, what Bogdanovich was presented with and what came out of that is again kind of remarkable. And it's a genuinely, I think, genuinely good film as opposed to Terror, which you kind of have to make apologies for.
No, I think Targets is highly effective even today. I love the combination of the old school horror and modern day real horror. There's scenes in there that are even today are pretty terrifying, how realistic they are. Being a huge Karloff fan, I love the fact that he was given a part to show what he was feeling at the time, that he's old school, nobody cares anymore. Even though he was kind of playing himself, he still gave this performance and still showing that he could even do comedy, but he gave a really really good performance. And I think it's a very effective film, and I love the fact that we go from this gothic old-fashioned horror to a modern day terrifying horror, what's really happening, and have those two combined, I think is brilliant.
I was going through a list of Criterion titles,
Mhm.
and I got to it that way because I don't think I came to it as a horror title. I think I came to it as this is a great film in general title. So I don't remember exactly how I stumbled across it originally. I don't think it was through Karloff, but I watched it on my own time. And then I went back and I rewatched it this summer. It was amazing because now going back and rewatching it, I turn on the audio commentary like you do.
Right.
I had not realized that they didn't get clearance for any of that stuff. And that blows my mind that you can stage a car accident on a Los Angeles freeway without telling anybody you're going to do it, and then have a guy with a sniper rifle off to the side, even if it's a fake sniper rifle. Like, you couldn't do that now. You would get so many SWAT teams. I can't believe they got away with that. Literally, they did not get arrested.
Yep. Well, it certainly wasn't legal then either. It's like the idea of pointing a rifle. You're not supposed to have a rifle anywhere near the highway, much less pointing at the highway, and much less staging accidents, like you said. And it's like, yeah, I listened to the commentary this time around as well, and I was just like, man, there's so much gonzo guerrilla filmmaking going on here, and the fact that they were able to put it together and make as good a film as they did, it's pretty great. David, how about you? When did you see Targets?
College, I think, on VHS, but I think I read about it first. I don't know if it's in one of Danny Peary's cult.
It is
movies book. Okay, so that I'm sure that's where I read about it. And then when it came out, I got it, and I remember it blowing me away pretty quickly. There's not a wasted moment in the entire movie. It's so, and now watching it again years later, after I have spent so many years as a writer, it is so elegantly crafted that and I actually looked it up because I saw the name Polly Platt this time through, who I had not heard of. But she's a production designer, but I think also the co-writer of the film with Bogdanovich, right? And so I was fascinated too. And the whole thing feels like wow, we finally got our big shot. Let's not waste it. You know what I mean? Let's really tell a story. And the juxtaposition of Karloff's story with, I can't remember the actor who plays the
Tim O'Kelly.
Killer.
Yeah.
Is just so it glides back and forth so elegantly. The who's the actress that plays Karloff's assistant?
I don't remember. I should have looked that up.
She's wonderful, but I looked her up as well. And she died very young, but was the first Asian American female to have a lead in a sitcom. So how about that? Someone we should remember, right? I was struck this time too by how young Bogdanovich is in this. He's a kid.
Yeah.
And I had just seen that Orson Welles thing, The Other Side of the Wind, where he plays a filmmaker in that as well. Although a lot smarmier. And he really, like, I look at him and I go, I can't believe these ideas came out of that. Like, what are you, 6?
Well,
really
he and Polly Platt were married at the time, and they worked on the screenplay together. However, Bogdanovich talks about how Samuel Fuller and he had a big meeting at Fuller's hotel room, and that Fuller did a major rewrite on the whole thing and then refused to take credit for it. He's like, a lot of the ideas, because apparently the idea was that Karloff was going to be wearing like a youth mask, like he was going to be a younger version of himself, and he was going to be just like running around like killing people. And yeah, apparently that went by the wayside, and they came up with this story instead, juxtaposing the Charles Whitman type assassin with Karloff's old school horror. The other thing that's worth mentioning is Karloff was not done. He did not consider himself to be washed up, and he wanted to keep working. And I remember reading that he was like concerned that people would, because it's very it seems very autobiographical, and this idea that like he didn't want people thinking that he thought he was washed up, or that he thought that his films didn't matter, or things like that. And Bogdanovich was like, it's okay. The more you talk bad about yourself on screen, the more the audience is going to be like, no, we love you. We love you.
Yeah, I can see that. It feels like a very authentic performance from Karloff.
Mm-hmm.
It feels very sincere. You don't get that sense that he had to memorize that dialogue, 20 minutes before the camera started rolling, or
Unlike The Terror.
Right. Well, and one of my favorite late Karloff movies is Cauldron of Blood, which I just love. And but I mean, Karloff looks like he's on death's door in that one. Like I mean, he really, like, they've just given him oxygen and shouted action, and you don't really get that sense. Certainly he seems elderly in the targets, but there's a lot of strength behind that performance.
The last few films that he did shortly after this, the four Mexican ones he did with Jack Hill and Cauldron, he had emphysema. He was in a wheelchair with an oxygen tank that, just like you said, he would get ready, get out of the chair, yell action, do his stuff, and then sit back down. And because he always said that he's an actor, that's what you have to do. He's never gonna stop.
And never going to let anybody down. He's going to give the absolute best that he can.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm kind of amused in Targets that The Terror is playing on the television, and it's just like used as him like looking back on his career and who he used to be. But it's only a 5-year-old movie at that point.
I thought that too.
Like, it's me in my former life 5 years ago. It's kind of odd.
He always looked older on film.
Yeah.
Well, and then they have that great scene from Criminal Code where he's watching, himself, and that was kind of his first kind of major role prior to getting the role of the Frankenstein monster.
Yeah.
And it's such a love letter to Karloff. Like, I think that's one of the things I love about this movie, is just kind of like how it does pay homage to all these different aspects of his career. And then it gives him that amazing showcase moment where he tells the story of Appointment in Samara, where it's basically an unbroken take of a monologue, and the camera's just tracking in the entire time. And it's just such a great showcase moment for him. And he just delivers the goods. It's so great.
There's also this wonderful moment, and I'm not sure how intentional this was, because it's not framed exactly the same way, I don't think. But they show a scene from Criminal Code where you see Karloff slowly threatening someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it feels almost mirrored at the end when Karloff, is slowly approaching. And then there's something about, and I'm sorry, I know this is a spoiler, but I assume everyone that's watching this has seen that. But there's something about the fact that he slaps him. There's not a fist fight. He doesn't take him out with a weapon of any kind. He's just like, "You punk," and he slaps him a couple of times. And there's something so poignant about that.
I also like the fact that the villain in this is completely opposite of what the old Gothic stuff. I mean, he's not twiddling his mustache and, the Snidely Whiplash type. He's a normal kid. He doesn't show any signs of deviant behavior. He's just, I'm going to start killing people.
Yeah, he's a sociopath.
Yeah, exactly. And I like the fact that which makes the film even more terrifying, because he literally is the kid next door. He's not a punk. He's not a delinquent or anything. He's this clean cut, nice kid that just decides to start shooting people.
I should have looked this up, but does anybody know when the release date was? I know it's 1968, but.
Well, that was the thing, is that I think it came out in, I want to say September, but it was after Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy had been shot.
Okay.
And there was a whole debate as to, should we not release it because of the assassinations, or should we release it as an exploitation, and a commentary on gun violence? And they ended up kind of like waffling between the two, where they released it, but not in a exploitation way. And it got some decent reviews, but then it kind of went away. I think it became more of a thing of like when Bogdanovich had his big moment with Last Picture Show, they're like, oh, and he also did that really cool little independent film. Have you seen it? Boris Karloff's in it, blah, 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 blah.
Okay. Yeah, that's why I asked. Like, I have to assume that he was filming it before those
Yes.
those events, and I have to wonder how much like he was tapping into what was kind of going. I mean, 68 is a notoriously violent year, at least in the public consciousness, but he got ahead of like the big events. So
Well, but I mean, like Charles Whitman had already happened,
sure.
and the Highway 101, like there was a guy who was shooting at cars on the freeway, like that had already happened. So he was very much pulling from the headlines for sure, when writing this story.
Yeah, but it seems like most people would have tried to go the opposite direction, be like, "Oh, people don't want this," but he just tapped right in there. And
There's certainly some commentary to be found if you're looking for it about how easy it is to get guns, because you see him go in and basically like buy enough, like ammo, and he buys like a rifle, he's like, and put it on my dad's account, like everything is just very casual in terms of accessing a gun. And I think that, that's an argument that continues on, 55 years later.
Well, and he's so casual about, I mean, not just casual, but in good humor.
Yeah.
Like that's the one thing that is so scary about him, is that like he really does not play the character as a villain at all.
And I mean, you see those moments, and he talks about like having some dark thoughts or having some thoughts to his wife, but she's tired. She can't really hear him right then. And in retrospect, like watching it on repeat viewings, you're like going, oh man, there it is. There's the cry for help that we didn't hear.
Right. The red flag.
But we see him, like putting the rifle bead on Karloff. We see him putting it on his dad. We just see him starting to like just play around with what would that be like to point a gun at somebody and shoot. And it feels so kind of disconnected from any kind of moral it's just kind of like, what would that be like?
Right.
And that's the terrifying thing about a sociopath. That scene in the house, where he has his first spate of violence. I mean, like that's a shocking sequence.
Yeah. He's typing, right? He's typing something and then just looks up and shoots. And you know it's going to happen eventually, but you don't know if this is going to be the moment. And it's still surprising.
Well, he kind of telegraphs, or at least you do, like Aaron point, where he was looking at his dad through the scope. At first, you kind of think, well, he's just going to go out and randomly shoot random people. But then when you see him looking at his dad, all bets are off. There's anybody's a target, and it just happens when the wife and mother come home, and without even like, oh my God, what am I going to do? No, he's just bam.
Right.
And again, that's the part of this film that even watching it now, it's kind of hard to watch at times because it's really, really terrifying.
Yeah, it doesn't feel dated in the slightest.
No. And it's one of those horror films that, completely opposite of the terror of what Karloff is making in this film, where you're kind of like, oh yeah, the horror film, oh, the bad guy. No, you're like, I don't want to watch this anymore. This is
yeah. Well, it's scary. I mean, I used to say like I liked monster movies because they weren't scary to me.
Yeah.
And it's like watching this and then going, or you could go outside your house and go to a drive-in and never come home again. And like we see that several times where, people are just sitting in their car at the drive-in, because after he goes from the rooftop shooting at the highway, then he goes to the drive-in. And I feel like that was not planned. I feel like he's on the run from the cops and he just pulls into the drive-in and hides, and then decides he's going to, have his last stand there.
Yeah. And I think, because I too also have trouble with, the serial killer or movies that kind of explore this idea of the mundane nature of serial killing or a shooter or something like that. I have trouble watching it, but with this one, it's operating on so many levels, and what propels me forward is, how are these stories going to connect? What is the, and you know, I have keenly aware that we're seeing two different kinds of horror: the death of one horror and the birth of another, right? Like, you know, that kind of gets beat over your head. But watching this, the inevitable meeting of the two of them, and wondering how it's going to turn out. And I remembered the ending from when I watched it this last time, and it still just packs a punch. It's just so perfect and so elegant, with him cowering in the corner, and you know, Karloff standing over him. You know, it's lovely.
Yeah, I mean, well, fun. I mean, just some fun facts. But I mean, like, this was made for $125,000, and 25 of that was going to Karloff. So basically, the whole movie was made outside of Karloff for like $100K, which is pretty wild. And it was
it's because they didn't have to pay for any permits or anything.
That's right. That's right. But Karloff apparently liked the script so much that he agreed to continue shooting, and they extended his time to 5 days, which is why it feels like it gets to be fleshed out. It really gets to be a fully told story, and they're not just trying to jam in what they can get in 2 days. But then the rest of the time was all shot in 18 days. So in addition to the 5 days they shot with Karloff, it was 18 days shooting everything else, which again feels semi-luxurious with Corman, but considering how much they cover a lot of ground. I mean, staging that stuff on the highway, they shot for, I think, like 12 nights at the drive-in, just that bit alone.
Oh, yeah, you definitely never get the sense that they have had to compromise a story choice.
It flows pretty well.
The person that gets shot in the phone booth is MASH's Mike Farrell.
That's right.
You already knew that?
I did know that, but only because Bogdanovich talks about it. But also, this was shot by Laszlo Kovacs, famous cinematographer who would really that whole early 70s wave of filmmakers. Like, he worked with a lot of them. Tim O'Kelly, a shooter. There's a brief moment where we see him in a photograph in uniform. And so we know he's a veteran of some sort. We don't know if he's a Vietnam veteran or, I mean, presumably so. He's the right age. And the fact that he like has his baby Ruths constantly, like, it feels like he's running on. Now, obviously this like predates the, like, the whole Twinkie defense. But I do think there's something going on there in terms of him, just kind of this regular American, clean cut guy having his baby Ruth. I mean, he's not drinking, he's not smoking. He's having candy bars and soda pop, like this is just a regular guy. And I think that's what you were talking about, David. The banality of him is they leave it so open to interpretation. As the fact that he's out there, that's what's scary, is that it's not that guns are accessible. It's that they're accessible to people who don't seem to have any red flags. He's somebody who clearly has been shooting with his dad for years and years. Like, it's just part of the culture. And again, he does not present as somebody we should have kept an eye out for.
Right.
Which is what makes him so scary.
Also, the film is, there's no music in it. It is almost purely sound effects.
Except the music I noticed that the music from from The Terror.
Right. That is what kind of informs, but that's the only like actual music we get. The rest of it we get, and I love the sound design on this. The sound design on this is incredible. Like, you hear his little inhalation. He takes the breath before he shoots. You get the little bam, bam. Like,
oh wow! I didn't
just
even
incredible,
notice
incredible. And again, like, just the kind of meticulous production design you don't expect from a run and gun production like this.
Nancy Hsu, first Asian American actress to have a leading role on a U.S. television series called Love is a Many Splendored Thing, regarded as the first American soap opera to portray an interracial relationship between an Asian woman and a white man.
Times were changing.
Any final comments on Karloff, on Corman?
Well, if you're a Karloff fan, you have to watch these just because. I think they represent two examples of a really dedicated actor. I mean, one of them is very hurried script, very hurried production shooting. He still pulls it off. I think David had mentioned he never looks like he's just sitting there going, okay, no, he's in it. He's all in it. And then Targets gives you another great example of semi-autobiographical performance of this old guy he's dead. You know, nobody wants to see his pictures anymore and stuff and intertwines that with a terrifying modern day story. I think two very respected films, but for different reasons.
Well, it's interesting what you just said about Karloff, because I think what he's doing in Targets is probably the most realistic portrayal of a character that we've seen him do in his career. I mean, he was always kind of playing heightened, either characters in heightened situations or heightened characters or both. And here he plays somebody who's so grounded and so realistic. And it's like, you know, this is the movie for which if it happened now with geek culture being the way it is, he would be being considered for awards and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, we'd be like, this is his crowning moment.
Yeah, you keep waiting to hear that Karloff voice, the that thing that he does, and it's there, but it's not manipulated. It's his natural speaking voice.
Yeah.
My comment is a question. So
great,
Aaron, this is for you, I guess.
Great, awesome.
Anybody can jump in, but I think Aaron, I feel like you're going to be the most knowledgeable here.
Wow.
Bogdanovich. Okay. Is this very unusual for him? Because it seems like he's more drawn to like the sort of romantic drama sort of stories. Is this really outside of his normal range?
It's certainly not indicative of what the rest of his career was. And I think, as I said, I think it is the case where an opportunity was presented and he was like, okay, I will take A and B and C and I will put them together and see what I can come up with. But I mean, again, he had the idea of the youth mask originally. So clearly like the horror genre was not necessarily his vein. And I think we have Samuel Fuller to thank for this thoughtful juxtaposition of these two realms of horror.
Yeah, it's certainly not a surprise to hear that the sniper idea comes from Sam Fuller. That's not a shock in the least. Okay, I was just curious because, like, for somebody who made such a terrifying movie, the fact that they never really seem to return to that is interesting to me because I guess it didn't get the acclaim at the time, but
sure,
clearly it's something they're very good at.
But you could say the same about like Friedkin. Actually, you know, you talk about Exorcist, like he never did another horror movie like that again that was anywhere close to that good. He did dabble in the genre again, but it's like that was just kind of like one of those perfect storms of all the right people in the right room. Because Friedkin, he's not a horror director, even though his most famous movie is one of the most famous horror films.
That's a perfect comparison because yeah, I would generally call Friedkin, you know, one of the great horror directors, even though he himself would not prefer that. And then Bogdanovich, I don't think of in that way, even though I am very comfortable saying that Targets is one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, agreed.
So
it's an interesting comparison you make there. I agree with that.
Oh, cool.
There's if you see Last Picture Show, which I watched last year, it's not a horror movie, you know, but you do see that there is kind of a deep focus on the inner experience of the characters that you see in Targets. And that,
great.
quite frankly, you don't see in a lot of his later stuff. Right? Didn't he do that What's Up, Doc? That Barbara Streisand and him. So you know you don't really see that there, but you do in Last Picture Show. They would make a good double feature actually.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking like the meditation on Sam the Lion, Ben Johnson's character, like an aging patriarchal figure.
Yeah.
Like that. I think that you're right. Those two do kind of feel of a piece. Well, thank you all so much. This has been delightful. This is a great way to kind of wrap up our 2023 offerings and venturing forward into 2024. So looking forward to having you all back again next year. Keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.